Hey there, all right, so glad that you are here now for this segment. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at actually sculpting eyes. Now, the eyes that you're seeing here, these actually come from someone I know and I love, a guy named Pete Zoppi. And so if you go over here into his Gumroad, zippzopp, way back in the day, Pete was actually in one of my early ZBrush classes. And this guy, he developed this really cool system, something I highly recommend that you check out. But it doesn't involve sculpting, and I'm a sculptor, and so that's what I need to be doing to kind of help take this process to the next level for me. But make sure you check out Pete's work. There's going to be a lot of wonderful stuff stored in here, and I'm going to do my best to take you through just the basics that you need to know to be able to implement this using a sculpting workflow. Now, as you can see, I've purchased this. Again, Pete is an old student of mine, and I believe in this guy immensely. And when we start this journey, just getting out there and Googling this is, of course, important. You should never start this without Googling it to get some sense of what other people have done. So I like to go out and I like to Google Iris Eye Sculpt. That's a great way. That's going to give you some cool examples of what people have done, like this over at CG Elves. Really neat. The process for it over here. There's a lot of cool, and look, that's pretty neat. Somebody went in there and really looked at how you can actually extract this stuff from the photo reference, which is pretty powerful, pretty awesome. And then if you go a little further, you'll get into a video, or not a video, but an article like this, the science behind these amazing photographs. And this elucidates two important points that you have to understand about the eyes in order to sculpt them. And that's that they're made out of 1 and 2 different types of muscles. So in one level, if we're looking at the iris in just a schematic view off to the side, one series of muscle fibers are all moving in this way. Okay? They're moving in to out. And then there's another group of muscles that are moving around, and they're doing this kind of, in fact, let's do this as another color entirely so it's a really bit more apparent. And these are the sphincter-like muscles. The sphincter-like muscles, which you can clearly see, let's do another color, you can clearly see right here. What these are doing are dilating. So the sphincter, if I'm spelling it right, they close it. They dilate the pupil. And then we've got these other muscle fibers moving in and out, and these open. So you've got one that kind of closes it, and you've got the other one that kind of opens it. But then the other thing that you have to be mindful of when you kind of look over here at the eyes themselves and these fibers, you're looking at this and it's like, these almost look like nerve fibers. So the other thing that you have to be mindful of about eyes is that when you normally look at muscle fibers, you're looking at them encased in sheaths of membranes and all kinds of different fascia and stuff that's just interweaving them and connecting them into kind of established pathways, right? Because what's the difference between a bicep and the brachialis, right? The difference between these muscles isn't as apparent when you're in there doing an autopsy as it is in the anatomy books, so to speak. They make it simple, but when you're in there and you're looking at it, it's a little bit harder to figure out. So when you're looking at it in the eye, you're looking at muscle fibers devoid, absent of this extra sheathing. They just exist inside this fluid, really. It's just they're in this open fluid, absolutely 100% exposed. And that's what we're seeing here, is little absolutely open and exposed muscle fibers. That's what we're seeing as it moves around in this way. We're seeing these just absolutely open and exposed muscle fibers, in this case in the sphincter muscle. Now, let's take a look at an eye dilating, and you can't really see much. I mean, you can kind of see what's happening a little bit, but the way we have to think about this in terms of the mechanics of it, let's just pause that, is that you've got a webbing going like this. that's basically pulling itself out to this kind of open area and then attached to the eyeball itself here. So this is this kind of open loom, so to speak. And then within it, kind of towards the middle, right? It's not really the middle, but it's kind of towards the middle. You've got this infrastructure that's going around and causing this to kind of move in or move out. You know, the connection and the relationship between these two is operating. So I like to think about it as it's this kind of rounded kind of structure here that has this kind of, it's like if you've got these kind of scissor hand kind of pieces. The scissor hands are these sphincter muscles, so to speak, that are kind of closing that in. And then you got to use the other muscles to pull it open. But I think I'm belaboring a point here to help you guys understand. And the most important thing for us to do is just to get some decent imagery for us to begin the sculpting process of the iris. But I wanted to introduce some really cool stuff in the beginning for you. But before we get into that, we've got to set ourselves up for success, because this is a real-time game, or at least that's my focus, is I want to do this in real time. And so we need to create a couple of very specific structures to make this work. And the way I'm going to do it is actually come in with a, let's just use the Sphere 3D. This is a primitive inside of ZBrush. I'm going to do everything inside of ZBrush just to make my life a little easier. I'm going to set my H divide down to 24, and I'll set my vertical divide to 36. I think that's probably pretty appropriate. I like to have divisions of 12. It's just a holdover from things that make games a little bit easier, because if you've got 24, then you can go down to 8. You can go up to 36. You can divide it to 12. And the normal map will behave a little better when it comes to baking. All right, if you don't fully understand that, you don't sweat it. It's not that big of a deal. Now, the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to see if we can figure out how big the iris should be, or the pupil should be. And the general wisdom is that it's going to be half of the diameter of an eye. So we've got our diameter here. And we're just going to look for the pupil for this area to be roughly half. Now, the easiest way on the planet to do that is you just set your brush size to roughly whatever that's going to be. There you go. Fully encompasses it, right? So my draw size is set to 500. I'm going to set that to 250. And that, we haven't converted it yet. That's going to tell me how big this needs to be, which is pretty good, right? That's going to be a nice, easy indicator. And lo and behold, thankfully, doesn't always happen, but thankfully there's actually a row of vertices right there that I'm going to be able to elicit to do the work that I need to get done. All right, now we're going to come in and say convert this over to a poly mesh. Got to convert it over to a poly mesh. And then I'm going to come into this area, and I really just want to isolate these polygons, because I'm going to try to group them. So I've done enough to be able to say, okay, that's the party I want. Then I just need to isolate this, Control-Shift-Click. There you go. All right, that's my group, right? It is. Okay, poly group, and I'm going to say group visible. And the reason I'm doing this it's mostly just for visual purposes, is so that I can kind of change my brush size and I don't have to sweat that again. Now I'm going to use a kind of cool feature inside of ZBrush. I'm going to use project primitive. Now, it's a pretty cool feature, but it's a little freaking nutty, right? You pull this thing out, and you get it out here, and it starts to do something. Now, there's a whole bunch of different, by default, it's kind of set to this spherical behavior. Let's turn polyframe off. And that spherical behavior is kind of perfect for this kind of cornea effect. Make sure, we want to make sure that we're affecting the entire, whoops, not that one. See, it's a little tricky. We want to get the whole cornea, that whole group, right? I want to make sure I get that whole group in there. But this shape in and of itself isn't exactly what I want. So I've got some modifications of what I can do to make that work. One thing we can do is we could increase our scale, and then kind of push that back in. See if that works. That's a definite possibility. There we go. That's much, much, much better. Now, a couple of things to be mindful of, all right? Because this is, I just want to make sure I'm going to cover my bases here, because it gets a little nutty, and I'm not quite sure what's kind of set for me by default and what is not. So the way that you control this with these kind of deformers is with these doohickeys, and I'm just going to use that informal word there. These are going to control everything. So what you want to do is hover over them and look for some readout down at the bottom, down here. And that's going to tell you kind of what it is. All right. So here's my primitive axes. Here's my primitive type. Here's my modifier. All right. So if I come in here, it's like, oh, okay, 0.5. And then it's like, oh, okay. So what these guys are doing and controlling for the most part is the overall shape of it. So I can actually convert this over into a square or into some other kind of form. But I'm going to leave it at its default. And then, of course, there's these different axes in which it can behave. But, you know, as you see, it didn't make that much of a difference. So shape down here. What do these guys do? Opacity. And really what that's saying is that's giving me the chance to dial it down and say, hey, I know you're projecting it, but I tell you what, I'm going to ask you in this opacity to completely remove it. So there you go. We've reduced the opacity of the effect. Now I'm going to put it back all the way to 1, and let's say, there you go. Go the other direction. Now, do I want to flatten that a little bit? Then I'll start to lower this. But actually, I got a pretty good result. I'm kind of cool with that. We could flatten it a tiny bit if we wanted to. But at this point, it's a little nitpicky. Now, the other thing I want to be really mindful of is something called tessellation. So let's go through, and you see this little green dot here. And yes, I know it's right next to the other green arrow. But it's the longer piece here. Okay, so in this longer piece down here, there's this tessellation feature. And this tessellation can start to add geometry in there. And that's what I don't want that. I'm not wanting that kind of effect in here. So if you're getting some kind of tessellation, just start to lower that so that it's not adding anything to your geometry. Okay, this mask, this is another thing where it's kind of like the same type of thing as opacity. But why not add another slider to it? Okay, this one's kind of a neat little, and not all of the reasons for these things are going to be apparent, but trust in Ophir, and something will always arise from that, I think, usually. All right, so there's some symmetry in here. We could, for example, here in the back, you could add some symmetry and do the exact same thing in the back. And that's a really important thing for some hard surface folks. Some of the things they need to do. If we hover over here, there is a blend, a new surface, and an accept. Okay, an accept is the same thing as coming into this little gizmo here and saying accept. Except it allows you to accept this change and then go off and move and create another change somewhere else. So that's a big kind of difference in this. You can accept and keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. It's kind of cool. All right, now blend. Blend's going to allow you to kind of, modulate the effect of this, so to speak. So you can blend between the sphere that you have and this one and the effects of it. A new surface is going to be some form, especially if you've got tessellation going on. It can kind of separate. Oh, this looks like we have to go back out of the accept. There we go. There we go. Let's go blend new surface. There we go. So here it's completely replacing this and giving me a different surface. So I'm going to leave that kind of at its default right there. And let's turn that back there. And then let's see. Yeah, we're pretty safe. All right. We're essentially done. Just pull it out as far as you want this thing to be pulled out. And scale it down so that all we're truly impacting is that poly group. You can do that by eye. Once we've got this done, this is essentially the eye, the shape. This is, if you were to Google, like we were doing before, if you were to go in here and Google the anatomy of an eye, you'll get this beautiful, wonderful shape. Now, one of the things to notice, I don't know, maybe you're a little eagle-eyed about this, but that's not a perfect circle, right? But we're going to leave it as a perfect circle just for the sake of it. And what we have is, we have, this fluid for the eye, and then we've got the lens for the eye. And within that, we're going to have, we're going to have the iris, these kind of plates, which we were looking at, that kind of dilate in, pull out using those two different muscles. And our job is to effectively simulate that within a renderer. But again, step number one, we got to start setting ourselves up to get this thing sculpted. All right. So what I'm going to do right now with this piece, just like this, is I'm just going to duplicate this, because this is the shape of the eye I want. So I'm going to duplicate this. It's right here. I'm going to come into this little gear, and I'm going to say accept all of this crazy. Okay, then I'm going to come back to the original, the one that I was dealing with over here, and then we're going to move this thing around. So we're going to come back into this project by primitive. Oh, we lost ourselves a little bit. There we go. Just had to undo. Let's turn that off. Come on. All right. And now, instead of what we were pushing out, we're going to actually pull this thing till it's past the halfway point, and then look what it does. It starts to pull in. That's really nice. That's what we want to do now. So now we can actually even, adjust the shape of this thing a little bit, but we're going to get both sides. We're going to get it pulling out, and we're going to be able to start to sculpt the iris shape as well. Just make sure that, just like with the other one, we're getting this to go all the way in. There you go. I'm going to leave a little lip around there, and we can pull in if we want, but I'm pretty okay with that. You could scale that back if you wanted to, but I'm pretty okay with that. And then we could try our opacity. Was it the X opacity? Oh yeah, that's kind of nice. Maybe even we could have just used this X opacity and just inverted it, to give us the result that we wanted. We can even try that. You can just undo. There you go. That was about the results we had before. So then let's just invert that. No, it doesn't give us the same. But, this is the kind of thing I like to do with ZBrush. Just get in, try a bunch of different stuff, and see what kind of floats. Because you never know where that logic is going to lead you. All right, so let's flatten that a little bit. And then it looks like I need to push that in, and I probably should scale that a little bit more. It's not liking that. It's being a little too precious on the edge. But overall, what I'm worrying about right now, pretty minor. I just need to be done with this. So I'm going to accept this as well. There you go. So we have now, and we'll turn this out, we have one shape like this, and we have another shape pushing out. And both of them exactly the same size. Okay, this is the crux of the eye that we're going to sculpt. This is kind of the key. Now I'm going to turn transparency. Actually, I'm going to turn solo off. I'm going to turn transparency off. And I want to look and see, is there any problem? So let's turn frame on. Do I see any issues of these guys? Let's turn transparency. Are they overlapping in any strange way? No, it looks like that's actually going to work. Well, actually, it does look like we've got a little bit of an odd lip right in there happening for this one. So let's come in. Yeah, that lip is not necessarily the best. But we can come in and say mask this, and then use symmetry. And not just symmetry, but we could come in and use radial symmetry and increase that count. I think we set it to 36. No, it was 24 vertical. Yeah, 24 vertical. So we just got to get our axes right, which it's probably, yeah, there you go, Y. So now each one of these vertices is linked up. Now we can come in and be like, yeah, we got that. You can move that in if you wanted to. And this is the benefit. You can smooth it and smooth that. This actually could become useful for defining the pupil itself. Okay, there you go. And then just a little bit to move that out. Cool. All right, now this is going to be the basis of our eye. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I see that. Always look for form that doesn't work. Something's wrong. No, that form works. All right, so this is the core. This is what we're going to work with as the base for us to get in and then build our eye from here. Stay tuned to the next segment. All right, now I've divided this kind of base model here up to about 3.4 million polygons. I've got about a subdivision level going to about 7. And I'm going to come in here with standard brush now and get into doing some sculpting. And remember, we got these 2 different layers that we need to sculpt. I'll leave the radial symmetry there. In some tutorials, you'll see, yeah, let's remove all that. People will talk about cutting this stuff out and all of that stuff. It's just not going to be necessary for what we're doing because we're using it to bake a map on something else. So we're going to be just fine with kind of blacking that out. All right. Now I'm going to then, as soon as I've got this, I'm going to come in with Damien standard brush and cut in a little bit. Going to try not to get too wiggly here in the center part, right? Because if you go back and you look at your reference, this is a little coagulated in the center and squiggly on the outside. So, once we find the basics, I think we're pretty okay in there. We might come in and actually switch our brushes now, come into the standard brush, and let's lower that Z intensity and harden that focal shift a little bit. And I want to just hit some areas. And there we go. Then we can come in with but the inflate brush. See if I can get a little bit of these guys kind of blurring in. There we go. Now we're starting to get them to kind of push right in. There we go. That's what I was looking for. I just need that lip. There we go. I need that edge. Here on this other side, they can just start to disappear. I don't care about that. But I do need a lip right there. All right, and we do need to massage it and sculpt it, right? There's some work to be done. I'm not just trying to phone this in. So I am going to come in and, do some work. But maybe at a certain point, it's wise to turn symmetry off and just do our job. Even though I'm doing the exact same thing, right? Just hardening edges. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. This is certainly something you could spend a lot of time kind of futzing around with, and there's a lot of avenues for how you can do this. Texturing.xyz's got some displacements that are amazing for all of this. But, my primary goal here, I've already kind of shown you one heavily money-dependent kind of process. Now I'm going to just show you, a little bit of a simpler tool for getting in there and creating something that kind of works. All right, now let's see what other brushes we've got. I'm going to come in and let's say /3 I want. So I want /3 actually. There we go. And a little smaller. Okay. Got a couple of these that are just a little. little something at the edges. There you go. And I'm using smooth directional right now, which is a pretty powerful brush. But it, see, if I go across, it removes it. But here, if I go down the length of the form, what it does is it blends it in a nicer way. And so it limits the smoothing effect along the direction of the brush. So if you're looking to really blend something, that's your boy right there. This is a great way to get a really solid effect moving, you know, through the piece. Okay. Let's get rid of all that crazy right in there. And then come back in with the inflate, harden that. Really harden that. There we go. I'm not worried too much about this texturing because, again, I can use that smooth directional and it'll just add some nice life to it. But it'll add it in the direction that kind of works for me. There we go. Smooth directional. Just adding a little bit of juice to it. Okay. Something like that might just cut it. If you want to, last thing I might try is to come in with H polish, lower my Z intensity, and just use that to kind of flatten these guys. And this I might even try symmetry on. And I might even try an alpha. This happens if we do it high. There we go. There we go. Okay. All right. Now, the pupil, all of these do not actually pull in like this. I'm going to start pulling all of this out. Get that a little smaller and build that up. There you go. Okay. Be a little flatter. Yeah. Okay. Voila. That's pretty nice like that. We can rotate these things if we want to. That's kind of cool. All right, but now we've got a little bit more to work on in terms of the spirally dealios on the outside. So we can come in here with Damien's standard brush and see what we can get. And I'm a big fan of procedural. So I want a system that kind of works. And I kind of like this smooth directional. I'll break it here at the boundaries and then come in just a little bit. There you go. Okay, and really smooth that stuff at the edges. And then back in with Damien's standard brush, and why don't we press Alt and invert it? Why don't we switch over to standard and see what happens if we do this with standard? Hard focal shift. Increase our Z intensity. There you go. And let's turn some symmetry off. And with some symmetry off, we got to adjust that. And I'll start thinking of these in terms of eighths. Like eighths. Just try that out and see. Does it really matter? You know, I'm not sold on that. Let's turn our symmetry back on. Let's just put that all the way there. And let's do something that's going to make our life a little bit easier. Let's see through, and we're going to put the any imagery here in the background and kind of line ourselves up with that. And this is going to help us get a clearer sense. And I think we're about right there. Yeah. I take the see-through down, and I'm just going to hold my cursor. Yeah. 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 Okay. So we can move these in a bit. All right, let's get ourselves into the texture, but the key thing to understand about the texture is that a blue eye isn't just blue. You know, there's a lot more going on. You can see the yellow happening in here, although, of course, I go right to the one where it's like, hey, solar eclipse is destroying your eyes. But you come in here and you'll see other colors going on. That's kind of the key ingredient. We come into this one. There's a lot more happening here than just one simple color. So let's get ourselves into ZBrush, and here's our piece. I'm not quite sure why it did that. So let's go over here into color. Let's fill it with white to begin with. Oh, it's these layers. Let's bake all of our layers because I think we're pretty clear with all of this. We'll go color, we'll fill object on the white. Otherwise, we'd had to paint it into each one of those layers, which would have been annoying. All right, and with the eye itself also, we got to be mindful is not necessarily white. You know, there's actually this kind of reddish, creamy kind of color to it. And so that's going to be part and parcel for what we need to achieve. So I'm going to actually come into my color here, and I'm going to move this a little bit into the reddish zone. Not too much, but enough. And that's a little too much. Let's go right there. There we go. I think that'll kind of work. And I can always, let me grab my color swatch. I'll throw it off over here to the side. So it's a little bit more stable. There we go. Let's try that. Let's go fill object. All right. Now we want what? Bluish eyes, so to speak. I think if our character, we're loosely basing this on Jean-Claude. And he's got blue eyes, if I remember right. Time for a little coffee, a little tea. Okay, so let's go and let's just drag one of these into Photoshop. Let's go Van Damme's eyes. And let's make sure it's kind of large so you can see some detail in there. and not too colored and not too much going on. I love that. Kiss my eyes. You have to watch that if you haven't watched that. It is beyond awesome. All right, drag this thing, copy this image into Photoshop. There you go. So what is the color that we're getting? And ZBrush has a different way of calculating the RGB. It is a 256 value. So you have to come in here and set this to RGB if you want. So 86, 65, 46. 86, 55, 46. Did I get that right? 65, 46. 86. All right, good. So that's not that green, is it? That's one of the fascinating things, I think, about this whole thing. All right, so let's just get this color kind of sprayed on there. All we're trying to do right off the bat is get some generic kind of tone in there. That's kind of the important thing right off the bat. And maybe I'm going to undo that. It'll be easier to get more control over the edge with this. Our symmetry's off since we kind of changed. There we go. And if you look at the corner of the eyes, usually you see some darkening. So let's just select right there at the edge. And it gets a little bit more purple. 75, 75, 45, and then 36. Okay. And you can set your RGB intensity lower if you want. What's going on? That is not the color I'm looking for, is it? I guess it is. I'm going to have to start to make this my own here in a moment now because I'm not happy with the choices I'm being given. Press C to grab the colors that you got there. And then where do we... And let's go into the HB sliders. Yeah, it looks like this is all within that kind of orange, yellow kind of spectrum. So somewhere right in here. And we've got some saturation. Brightness value, blackness is about there. Saturation is going to be about in here. Okay. All right, now as we come through and we do this, there's a couple of things I like to do. I like to come in and say color spray. It's a very powerful brush. I come into modifiers, and I like to set this the scale variance, not the scale. Where's the color variance? The color intensity. The scale variance, color intensity. Let's just try this. This has a way of changing the color in things. It adds this red, this green, all of these different components to it. But you got to come in here and you got to change your scale variant a little bit. And let's select a different alpha. And I'm going to lower my radial count so it's not so crazy. Let's go to 6. Okay. I'm really seeing purple, and I know that's a little on the green. And then let's really darken the crap out of this part. All the way up to that edge. There you go. And now, probably wise to use some cavity features. So I'm going to come into cavity, into masking, and I'll say mask by cavity. And then I can turn that mask off. And this will be pretty fascinating, pretty cool the way this kind of works. But let's go in and let's look at somebody with green eyes. But I want to look very large images. These are green eyes with problems. Let's do blue eyes, and maybe we'll get a little bit less nonsense mixed into it. There you go. Copy that. And let's just check our color spectrum. So we're in the blues, blues. Okay, cool. We're here. And then what was the saturation? So saturation's a little low, and the brightness a little high. But saturation's a little low. Look at that. Now, having put that earlier brown in there actually works in our favor. That's kind of a nice little trick to keep in mind as you're doing this. Let's brighten that up a little bit. And we want to find, like, as it brightens up, does it become more saturated or less? Yeah. As it brightens up, it becomes less saturated. There you go. Okay, and then as we get in closer to this, it starts to darken and desaturate. Or increase in saturation. And then probably move along the spectrum a little bit more. No, the color hue stays the same. It just kind of saturates a little bit more. Okay. There we go. Let's darken that a little more. Can I put that anywhere else? Maybe I can invert that mask. And I can put it in the crevices. Okay, but I definitely want to make sure that that hole is black. I don't want any confusion there. And whoops, bring that up. There you go. Okay. Now we want these little stringy bits. They're going to get a different kind of tone, so I'm going to turn my symmetry off. And let's press C to sample that. And these were lighter, if I remember correctly. We can come back and take a little look at this and see. Yeah, these were definitely lighter. Let's go up. And what happens if we do yellow? I kind of like that. Let's clear out any mask that's in there and just let me work on just that. Okay, is that good enough from a distance to kind of give me some power, some cool stuff? I'm not sure about this blue and this orange, so I'm going to turn symmetry back on. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to just darken this rim. Oh, in this particular case, we do not want that. And we will increase that back to 24. There you go. Okay, and then press C, and I'm gonna come in a little bit. There we go. Yeah, I don't want it to be a perfect edge. Okay, and then I'm gonna select this. No, I'm gonna go into a little bit of yellow. What happens? Yeah, just gonna brighten that all. So I get this nice little rim right there. And then back into C. and desaturate. Okay, and then as we move out here as well, let's press C, and I'm gonna come in and just make this a little bit more saturated, and I move towards saturated as I go darker, and that's a little iffy. Let's come into this and this. Okay, that's pretty crap because of the symmetry. And because of that pattern. So what can I do to shake that up a bit? What's going on? That RGB intensity should be, there you go. Press shift and you can turn Z add off and just use RGB, and then you actually can smooth the color. And since we're poly painting, I can drop down a subdivision level and use that and even more to really smooth it out, and then to kind of keep different levels of detail as we go up. You know, this can be an interesting tool, but let's go in and say make that a little wider, and then see if there's any value. In whitening that. There you go. All right, that has some nice beauty to it. I'm not sold on it. There's a million things I kind of want to do. Like I've lost my edge here, and work this, but you know, as I tell my students, it's not a problem until it's a problem. So, you know, we're in the 12 days of realism. This is not, I do not want you to be thinking that this is, you know, this is to get you the win, so that you look at this and you're like, oh my God, I can actually do this. I can do something more than I thought was within my range. I'm giving you all the, not all, I'm giving you the little tidbits that I've learned and some of that stuff to help you get there, and, you know, and reach further than maybe you've reached before. All right, that's going to wrap it for this section, and then we're going to get in and look at how we take the low res, the texture, all these things into Marmoset and make it work. Because there's a couple of extra steps that you've got to add into the conversation, including either distorting the image or distorting the UVs to match when you're dealing with the baking, and there's just some issues we got to deal with. All right, so we're going to look at those in the next section.